One of my favorite quotes when quoting myself is, "We aren't born with built-in emotional responses for every life event. However, we are born to feel emotions, and the emotion we feel is up to us." Does that make sense to you? Or does it feel counterintuitive? I can't control how I feel. And yet you can. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How we were born to feel emotions and how what we feel is up to us.
This is Flavors of Emotions, expanding your emotional palette for a tastier life. My name is Kim Cordy. Together, we explore how to make sense of our feelings through the lens of a chef, understanding flavors and a recipe. I am here to help you refine your emotional palette to differentiate the emotions that shape your world.
When I came up with that quote, it was at a point in time when writing my book where I realized, man, we really do have control over our emotions. And if you've never heard me talk about this before, we have two kinds of emotions. The kind that we're used to, like love and hate and like and dislike and anger and joy. This wide breadth of possibilities of emotions. Then we have a different kind of emotion that we don't think of as an emotion, but it is. Hunger, thirst, tiredness, sick, all of these things are emotions. It's a communication from the brain to the body and the body to the brain using a system called interoception. It is a sensory system, just like hearing, seeing, all that other sensory stuff we learn about. We only learn about 5, but there's way more. And it's our sense of how we feel inside of our bodies that delivers the emotions to us. But how are those emotions created? When you are a child, you learn what things mean. You learn how to label not just what you see and hear, but even how you feel. When you're crying and the food you eat takes away those hunger pains, and that label of hunger is what you know to say, "Oh, I'm hungry," right? Like that's how we communicate it to ourselves and to other people. I'm hungry. It's a common language that we use to identify a feeling. Same with every other emotion. But we also learn what we see, what we hear. I said before, all of our experiences get labels and they get stored in our brain. And our brain stores these. You could call them memories. You can call it learning. You can call it beliefs. You can call it experiences. I think I said that already, but all of these get put together in our brain and stored together. And then when further down the road, you have a similar experience, it's going to go back to that one. And when I say a similar experience, I mean the brain is receiving all of that sensory input. And it learns to prioritize sensory input based on our prior experience, because especially if it's happened more than once, it gets prioritized. So if you've always seen here pink and you just labeled it pink, and then all of a sudden someone says, "Oh no, wait, this is hot pink," or whatever you want to call it. I call it, hot pink. Some people now call it Barbie pink. If you're listening to this, you're not seeing my sweater, but those of you watching this on YouTube or in my community, you will see I'm wearing a hot pink sweater. And we learn what that distinction is, right? So we learn and can have the opportunity to do the same thing to distinguish our emotions. And the brain learns this and uses it in the future so that the next time a similar color appears, we're going to label it hot pink, or the emotion and the emotion around it, whether you liked it, you didn't like it, you thought it was, too bright. All of these things, it all gets put together and then it's used in the future. When we have an emotion around something, all of these memories, they do contain how we felt at the time, even if it was a little benign, even if it was just like, neutral, kind of like a creme brulee, wasn't a lot of flavor around it. And it could be more intense, like a dark chocolate cake, real rich, and you have this real deep connection to it, this stronger feeling. Or it could be something that's just really horrible, like some bad cheese that you ate that just was terrible, that stinky cheese, and it was just disgusting. And so that feeling comes with the memory. And you use it in the future, just like you use the experience of creating the color, you use the feeling. It all gets put together in a nice memory package that's used in the future for similar experiences. I might be repeating myself, but I just really, really, really want to hit that home because your feelings are with it. And then when that experience presents itself in the future, the brain has this process. Of course it does. It has a process for everything. And the neuron with the winning, what I call recipe, meaning out of all of this data that's coming in, the brain has to say, what is the best use of this data? Like, what is it most like? What can we create for Kim? And it makes a prediction. And that prediction is what you see, hear, smell, blah, all that stuff, and what you feel. The neuron produces what's called a dense core vesicle. Yeah. Like, what does that mean? So I just want you to think about it's like this floating glob that contains a bunch of these peptides. And so peptides, these little chemical messengers, they get put into this blob until the neuron decides to release it. Now, it sounds like it could take a long time. It could be, milliseconds. It could be a little bit longer. Or perhaps the brain makes a redo and says, no, we're going to use this one. I don't know all the details. I think it's kind of hard to know all the details, but I'm assuming that there's a reason for the delay. And then once the decision is final, this is the winning recipe, it gets delivered. So thinking of your brain like a kitchen, housing all of these chefs. And the chef now gives this plate of peptides to be served to the body. And now these peptides, it's kind of like an all at once experience. Some peptides go to other neurons so that they can do some things like send out some hormones or whatever else that they need to do. And then other peptides just go to every cell in the body. And if there is a matching receptor for this peptide on the cell, it connects and then it produces an emotion. You see, it's all in the brain. And then that emotion produces a feeling. And it's only when we are connected to that feeling. So it's like telling the interoceptive system, this sensory system, hey, this is what the brain has told us. And we've produced this emotion. And the feeling is the conscious recognition of that emotion. Do you get the difference? You've got an emotion. It is produced in the body. And the feeling is when we consciously recognize it and notice the sensations that this band of peptides produced. And that's the difference between feeling and an emotion. An emotion is a chemical reaction. In fact, the late, great Dr. Pert, she called these peptides molecules of emotions, and she wrote a book on the topic. And it's a really, really interesting book, how she traveled this path to even name it this. And it was just so enlightening how she was just trying to figure out drug delivery, and she discovered these molecules of emotion. And what's even more interesting is that she said there's a one-to-one relationship with the immune system and emotions. In fact, the work went on after her death, untimely. She was too young to go. And there's another Dr. Fulvio Acquisto. In fact, I'm going to read from my book a quote by him where he talks about how important our emotions are to our immune system. Dr. Fulvio D. Acquisto christened his research affective immunology. And remember, affective means emotions, the kind of emotions like love. The other emotion, by the way, is called a homeostatic emotion, the kind like hunger, thirst. And he is a psychoneuroimmunologist. Big words. Anyway, he says that his research is trying to answer these questions. Is it that chronic stress causes depression, which then causes inflammation, which in turn is responsible for the increased risk of cardiovascular disorders? Or is it that constant inflammation causes depression and ultimately an increased risk of developing cardiovascular disease? Where is the beginning and where is the end of this vicious cycle? And in another quote I'd like to share, it was an interview with the digital publisher Inverse. And he said something very important. And I really want you to listen to this. Listen, pay attention. He said, this means that if we are laughing, we have an immediate change in immune cell numbers in blood and in their functions. As in the case if we are angry or crying. For every change in the way we feel or live, there is a mirror correspondence in the immune system. That is ginormous. When we go back to this idea that we weren't born with built-in emotional responses for every life event, but that we were born to feel emotions, but that the emotions we feel are up to us, then you understand why this is so important to me. And for you to understand, we have choices in how we feel. It may not feel that way, and that's what I'm bound and determined to get people to understand is not the case. And that sometimes when we feel certain ways and we don't turn it around, then we find ourselves getting sick all the time. Or we're, dealing with heart disease and all these other things. We're like, well, how did I get this? It's not in my family lineage. It's not anything that I've had an indication of before. It's like a first time event that should never have happened because you have a good diet, but you don't have a good emotional diet. And what you consume in the way of emotions is equally as important as what you consume in the way of food. And this is why when you can pivot your emotions, because you have that ability, you don't have to stay stuck. And when you can pivot, you profit. You profit emotionally, you profit physically, you profit in every way. Your health is dependent on your emotions, and your emotions are dependent on your health. So let's take care of both.
So let's go through a couple of examples of how to change how you're feeling. One of the most important things is being able to name and identify the feeling. When you can do that, it gives you a bit of space to decide how to respond. For example, instead of I'm angry, try I'm feeling the heat of anger. What's it trying to tell me? Shift your focus. How much have I talked about focus? Your focus is within your control, like breathing or thoughts. And it helps interrupt the autopilot response to emotions. Why? Because you're taking in more ingredients, which leads to my next point. Choose new ingredients. The brain is pulling up past recipes, and its focus, like I just talked about, only delivers so many that it's going to use. It's going to prioritize them. So if you can get curious about what's going on in this situation, look at what else is going on. Are you capturing the situation correctly? Like I said earlier, this is a great way to help change your feeling. Most of all, practice interoception. Practice being aware of your body. And you can do this quite simply by noticing things in your body. Like I like to use when you're eating. How does it feel? Taking 10 seconds just to check in how they're feeling physically. Because you know what? If we're sick or hungry or tired, that can have a huge impact. Just because you're in a bad mood doesn't mean other people need to suffer because of it. Notice it and do what you need to do to change your mood, or hibernate until it changes, because moods can be controlled with lots of things, including focus, choosing new ingredients, and taking care of yourself physically.
If you're curious about learning how to do this or doing it in a different, a little bit non-threatening way, I don't know if you've checked into what my work is about, but I use food as a way to help people not only connect to that sense of how they feel inside, but also to connect to different emotions, to identify emotions with more distinction, just like you can food or anything truly in life. It doesn't have to be food. It's just a nice, easy, relatable way because there's so many emotions with food, right? Think about the last time you shared a meal with your family. Good or bad, there's an emotion with it. And the actual food, too. When you recall a dish, you go, oh, that was so good. Thus, the title of my book, Yucky, Yummy, Savory, Sweet, Understanding the Flavors of Emotions. Now, look, I wrote this for me. And so when I talk about this and when I share this with people, I am thinking about personal experiences of my own and how screwed up my life was. I had a difficult time in relationships, and I'm not talking just romantic relationships. I'm talking about relationships with family, friends, whomever, because of my emotions. And I almost lost my job twice. In fact, I was fortunate to see the writing on the wall and to find another job quickly. And upon reflection, it was honestly my inability to recognize and handle my emotions. In fact, this is a true story, but many, 25, 30 years almost after the fact, when I should have been fired, but my boss didn't fire me because I was an emotional wreck, I contacted him via LinkedIn and I thanked him and I acknowledged what a mess I was and how I appreciated the fact that he didn't fire me and that he stuck up for me. And that allowed me to find another job before I would get fired. And so in my work now, I've seen other people, a lot of people whose emotions get in the way of their work relationships with coworkers, with their boss, and they don't have the capability to understand they need to look inside. If you think that it's other people who are making you feel a certain way, I'm here to remind you that it isn't them, it is you. You take the perceptive ingredients that you are getting from them and other things surrounding the situation and cooking up the recipe that your brain delivers. And if you don't like the recipe, or if you can't look at the recipe and taste it and say, am I tasting this correctly? And I'm talking about an emotional taste, using your emotional palate to capture the flavors of this situation to see, is it what I just experienced? Because just like what we see at first isn't always true, what we hear at first isn't always true, what we smell at first, the flavors of what we taste aren't always true at first. the same with our emotions. I invite you to join me. Go to kimcordy.com. I have a community that will be up hopefully by the time this is out. And I'm going to be offering courses, corporate workshops, because as a boss, in fact, I've had this conversation with clients. You can't control what others do with what you give them. The only thing that you can do is give them as much detail of ingredients as possible. But even when you give that much detail, they might pick certain things. Their brain might focus only on certain things. And that's because it's inside of them. And there's nothing that you can do about it except offer them tools like what I'm offering to help people see their feelings differently, to help them to recognize they might be getting them wrong. And as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this because I know so many people whose emotions or their inability to recognize them, to manage them, to pivot from them has had a seriously detrimental effect. And I don't want that for anybody. And if just even small, slight changes can make the difference, I'm thrilled, beyond thrilled. It makes me super joyous. And that's an emotion I want to feel more of. That is it for today. I'm continuing to put out chapters of my book on my YouTube channel under the playlist Yucky Yummy Savory Sweet. And, you can check it out. You can also check out my book, and it's available on Amazon. I just want to say thank you. I will never, ever, ever underappreciate the minutes that you spend listening to me. I know there are 1,000 jillion podcasts out there, and the fact that you took just even a few minutes is appreciated by me, and you need to know that. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Flavors of Emotions. Ooh, can't forget to say, if you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks.